Elaine, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Obviously, you've scaled some heady heights in the fitness industry. And I know as a woman, there's obviously been challenges in achieving that. And not only have you done that, you've just recently launched your book, High Performance Through Happy People. So it'd be great just to kind of get a bit of background to your journey, what you've had to overcome to get to where you are, and what your plans are for the future, and ideally some tips for other people listening on how they can make it happen too.
Okay, just a small question. Yeah, well, I'm a fitness industry veteran. I've been around for 30 something years. I think the key thing with me is that, I came up from the ground, and my original job was I was a fitness instructor at a gym. I think even before there was a fitness industry. I don't think there was a fitness industry when I first started out. There was there was a gym on my high street in my hometown in the north of England, and it was just a tiny little 300 square meter basement gymnasium that didn't have any cardio. There was a couple of exercise bikes. There's no big treadmills or anything like that, and all the weight machines were almost like bodybuilder style, and this is a women's only gym. And as I say, I kind of started there. I thought it was really cool to go and work out and exercise, and what I most fell in love with was the process of kind of convincing other people to get into fitness. And I remember distinctly like being on this gym had a upstairs which had a reception area overlooking the high street, and there'd be really busy peak times of lunch and evening where people would be walking by the front door, and I can remember looking out and seeing all this rush of people, and occasionally somebody would stop and kind of look in and maybe go to push the door, and then they would kind of go, okay, I'm not going to do it today, and they would rush off again. And so I kind of understood how hard it is actually for a lot of people to get into exercise and to kind of make that jump, and to the intimidation factor of coming to a gym. And so I really valued when people push the door and walk through it, that I'm going to do the best I could do to help convince them to go on this path to being healthier and fitter, and not let them down by not giving them the information they needed. So I kind of fell into sales, actually, fitness, selling gym memberships through that process of just being there for people and been able to convince them that there's a better way of life, and health and fitness is really important. And obviously that was a very long time ago, but so that's how I got into it. And then I just kind of worked my way up. As I say, that was really early, kind of late 90s of being in the fitness industry. And I got into working for an entrepreneur who started a gym chain. And he opened one in Edinburgh, one in Glasgow, and I opened the third gym in Leeds, and as a membership salesperson. And that was my start into the fitness industry. And I sold, I think I worked it out, as about 27,000 memberships in my time of pre-selling gym memberships. And I'll tell you, it was not glamorous. This is back where regulations weren't as strict. So, we'd have the building site of where the gym was going to be, and we'd put 2 chairs and a table down, and I would have like a plastic folder wallet with all the kind of pictures of what the gym equipment was going to look like. And, we would advertise in the newspaper back then, that there was a new gym opening, and come down and see us. And people would walk in not knowing that the thing hadn't opened yet. And, they were just bewilderingly looking, like wandering around the building site going, I thought there was a gym here. And I was like, yeah, come and sit down. Let me tell you all about it. And, people would sit down, and to be honest with you, that's where I honed my sales skills. I'd be sitting with people, helping create the understanding about, what was going to be built and what a gym was, and but more importantly, the importance of making a decision about changing your health and wellness and changing your life. And, and I do that hundreds of times, thousands of times, convincing people. And, then we'd open the gym and I would move on to the next one. And wow. I did that 28 different cities in the UK of pre-selling gym memberships.
All on visualization techniques as well. It's very impressive.
Yeah, well, I think I just in some ways I preferred it when the gym wasn't open, because you could really help people probably think about the importance of making a decision about changing your life, as opposed to just kind of walking into the gym and it looks beautiful and they fall in love
Yeah.
with the equipment. It's actually, the equipment is just an ends to a means, isn't it? I mean, the equipment,
Mm,
nobody joins a gym to run on the treadmill. They join a gym to run on the treadmill to get the outcome.
absolutely.
But it almost felt a bit more purist selling the outcome when I was at a pre than selling the beautiful treadmill.
But as long as the gyms actually got built in the end, and it wasn't just you were taking people's money for the t-shirts.
Well, there was plenty of operators out there that were doing that, but no, we weren't one of them. We did actually open the gyms, and they were beautiful, and people did come in and get results, which again was super rewarding, being able to go
Yeah.
back and see people. And yeah, from that moment on, I knew this was the industry for me, and I never wanted to be anywhere else. And the entrepreneur I was working for, was very successful, very, very difficult guy to work for, but very successful. And, he was one of, I think, the youngest entrepreneur to float his business on the AIM stock exchange.
Wow. Okay.
But, yeah, but then when I left there, I went to work for Fitness First, and I was very, very early in the Fitness First journey. Obviously they were the real kind of pioneers of big box gyms, and took on really the world, not just the UK. And I was very kind of early in that journey, and so I got to work obviously directly for Mike Balfour, who's the founder there. And that really was where I learned how to hone the skills of building up a gym empire. And it was crazy. We were opening a club every 4 days back then, and these were corporately owned, these weren't franchise. It was easy to expand like that when you're franchised, but when they're corporately owned, it was nuts. We had, I mean, there was a group of us, and we had no clue what we were doing. We were. I mean, I remember when we were expanding internationally as well, because we knew that anybody could copy what a gym concept was, and we had a really good concept. So we were expanding internationally, and I remember going to a meeting, and we had this business plan which was called Land and Expand, which was just literally, all it was not very sophisticated. It was like, okay, get into a country, have a look around, what gyms can we acquire, and then acquire them, and obviously get a kind of a foothold in the country. And we did this in France, and we were so busy. We bought a chain of gyms in France, but we didn't really have that much time to actually go and have a look at them all. So we bought we bought this chain. It didn't perform so well, and there was a bit of an emergency situation where one of us had to go across and kind of sort it out. And because I actually did a short stint working in France in my teens, I was kind of self-nominated to be the person to go across, because I best French, and I didn't speak great French either. So hence I kind of became the European sales director, and managed to when we expanded across 12 countries. So, but say, literally no clue what we're doing, making up as we went along. There was no blueprint for running gym chains at that point, because we were pretty much the first. But I'm very grateful, because there's not many industries that you get to kind of figure it out on the fly, and to have that much autonomy that you don't have the kind of qualifications to go with it. But yeah, it definitely gave me my real life MBA in how to grow gym chains.
Wow. I mean, that's like going from 0 to like 1,000 in a very short space of time. And I guess you must have still been pretty young at this stage. So what was it like having this kind of level of responsibility and being in the center of that kind of growth? And particularly, like you said, in the 90s, I can remember it well, you went from having a very spit and sawdust gym to this kind of more commercial, kind of not cookie cutter, but the idea was that they would all look similar and have the same equipment. Was it very exciting to be in the center of all of that? And do you look back and think, how did that even happen?
Yeah, I don't even think we had a grasp of how successful this was. And we were just trying to keep up with the demand. We had, with Mike Balfour, he was a very ambitious entrepreneur and founder, and drove the business hard, which was great, because it was a land grab. We're trying to get the concept out as far as we could before somebody else would come and copy it. And and it was a really good concept. Up until then, gyms had been a lot of health clubs where they're, racket sports and super expensive and inaccessible for the kind of, the Joe Bloggs on the street. It's really, fitness first that took, it was about fitness for everyone, for everybody. And I think that was, almost like, almost like decommoditized fitness and made it available to, everybody, where you say prior to that it had been quite a luxury item, and it was really the start of that. And Fitness First was definitely the pioneers of it, and adding massive value. If I think about what Fitness First was back then, it was 29 quid a month. It was, I remember it because I sold enough of them. 29 quid a month, and in that you got there was a free juice bar, there was free DVD library. Do you remember the DVD library?
Actually, I think at one point, wasn't it a video library? I think it went from video to DVD. I kind of remember I was a member of the two of them, actually, the one in Camden and then later the one in Kingley Street. And I remember, part of the motivation of going to the gym was to get the latest DVD or video release instead of going to Blockbusters and spending $2.99 or whatever it was. So it was amazing. I mean, for people listening now who were born, in the kind of 90s or even, later, the concept of getting it from a gym is just like bizarre when you've got all these streaming services now. But it was absolutely pioneering.
Yeah, it was genius when you think about it, because, what Mike figured out was that if you rent a DVD out, and it was free to rent, but you had to bring it back in 48 hours. And if you didn't bring it back in 48 hours, there would be fines, And he realized that, how do you get people back into the gym or get them to return their DVDs and they'll have a workout? It was, an amazing retention strategy and a usage strategy, But say, that value proposition that, there was like massage chairs, there was, all sorts of facilities. Mike used to say, like, with the changing rooms, we're going to build changing rooms that are as good as, if not better than the ones they have at home. When they go into their bathrooms at home, we want them to be, the kind of reminiscent of what it's like to be at home. Anything that people come into contact with that is, they are intimately in contact with, it's got to be the best quality. So, again, some real unbelievable lessons that I was educated in that I've carried through the whole of my career. Thanks to that opportunity. But don't get me wrong, it was nuts. It was crazy times, and yeah,
I remember. So obviously you went on from there. I think was it to Virgin was your next move? Is that right?
Yeah. So I had the opportunity to say I've been at Fitness First for 10 years, and in fact I left the day that that Mike left. So he moved on to chair position, and and I think it was because 10 years is a long time to be at a company, and I think I love working for entrepreneurs and working with entrepreneurs, and I just kind of felt it was my time to move on, do something new. And it's often serendipitous that you just end up with an opportunity coming along and a door opening at the same time. And I just happened to kind of get one of those phone calls on a rainy Tuesday afternoon from somebody who got my name from somebody who said, look, how would you feel about coming to work for Richard Branson? And, it was a headhunter from Virgin active in South Africa. So I was like, yes, that sounds like an awesome.
I'll do that. Send the plane. I'm coming.
Yeah. And I mean, you'll know what it's like. I was raised on Richard Branson and, all of his antics and, things we need to get up to, with the publicity stunts, and, I had the Virgin credit card and I listened to Virgin radio, and,
Thank the Virgin Cola or Kool-Aid maybe.
But it was just that very first business book was Losing My Virginity by Richard Branson. So I was a full paid up member of that club, so to have the opportunity was incredible. So yeah, there's no way I was going to say no, even though I think I actually did accept the job before talking to Ben, my husband, and consulting with him. So, and I say my Jasmine, my daughter, was only 1 year old at that point. So obviously uprooting the family and moving them to South Africa, which at that point was not that long past the apartheid era, and we're still not still isn't a safe country. has a lot of issues, but you know, it was a big move for any young family to make, but we jumped regardless, and yeah, made that move.
And I guess was that a new. If you'd done your MBA with Mike, was this the kind of post grad MBA with Richard, or was it more of the same? I mean, did you learn a lot more? Did you find that your learning kind of slowed down in terms of that you'd done such a fast kind of thing in that early part of your career that it's more about honing the skills rather than learning new ones, or do you think you've continued to learn?
I think it was different. So, I mean, I built a bit of a reputation at Fitness First for being, you know, for kind of, you know, I really invested in my own leadership, and some of the leadership I had at First really held me accountable for improving my leadership skills. I say that the last leader I had when I was there literally held me accountable. Like 10% of my income was going into my own self-development, and I had to show, I had to actually show that leader how I was spending that money. And, you know, so I did all of Tony Robbins courses, I did Zig Ziglar, I did Stephen Covey, I did Jim Collins, you know, when they were around, you know, I literally did them all. So I'd kind of become known, my reputation was for leadership, and attached to that was culture, you know, that I was good, kind of building good cultures. And that's what I was pitched as at Virgin Active, which was, I wasn't overly aware of that when I went for the role, because when I took up the role, I was most excited about going to learn about how do you do Virgin, you know, how do you get this amazing culture and brand across so many different types of products and businesses. And, you know, so I kind of went with my learning hat on. And it was only when I landed and started in the business that within the first few days of being there, it started to dawn on me that what this was a Virgin company. And there's a reason for that. It was because I don't know whether you know the history of Virgin Active in South Africa, but it's an interesting history. It wasn't Virgin Active from the beginning. So it was another company called Health and Racket. And Health and Racket had a real checkered past. I don't think I'm talking out of school when I say this company was run by borderline gangsters. And what they did was they had a reputation for really hard sales techniques. So that they owned 130 gyms in South Africa. These are big gyms that would have maybe 20 people in their sales offices, and those people were commission only driven, where they were selling lifetime memberships to the club, and they were very high pressured selling. So they would sell them over and over again for big, you know, for cash amounts. And what had been happening was and you can Google this, it's the story's out there, I'm not telling it for the first time. And what they were doing was they were taking those cash payments for their memberships, and they were embezzling that money out of the country, which is a huge no.
Slightly illegal.
Slightly illegal, and especially in South Africa, where there's a lot of volatility in the currency. So there's a lot of protection around currency and exporting currency.
Yeah.
So there's a kind of famous story where there was this kind of 4 a.m. dawn raid by the police, where they found out what was going on with these directors, and they kind of swept them up out their beds and put them in paddy wagons and took them off to jail. And the business went into liquidation literally at the same time. So there was 130 gyms. There was 700,000 members in these gyms, 700,000. And there was 5,500 employees. So it's a massive company.
Big company, yeah.
And what had happened was, so these guys had disappeared, all got arrested, gone into their court cases. The business went into receivership. The liquidators came in and they just put up the notices on the club door, and it just said to these members, you know, the company's gone into liquidation. And then they tried to find a buyer for the company. And I guess with it being a South African business, nobody around the world, including Fitness First, because I was there at that time, was interested in buying a company in South Africa, because it was just so volatile. You know, it was still unrest in the country. So I guess at that point, with so many people, these 5,500 people that had lost their jobs weren't just kind of people like you and I can go and get a job somewhere else. they often were living in the townships as the only breadwinner for their whole family. So Nelson Mandela, who was the president at the time, he got involved, and
Wow.
he was the one. So he actually got involved and said he would commit to doing what he could do to save this business from going into liquidation. So he, as I guess only Nelson Mandela can do, he actually
picked up the phone to Richard. Brilliant.
And there's a great story where Richard, so he calls it Richard Branson. Richard doesn't know him at this point. Joan, Richard's wife, answers the phone, doesn't fully believe it's the real Nelson Mandela, thinks it's maybe one of Richard's mates mucking around.
Yeah.
And then realizes it is actually Nelson Mandela, completely panics, and she runs with the phone to give it to Richard. And
yeah.
Richard at this point is actually naked, lying in the bath.
Oh my God.
So he takes the phone from his wife, and I guess kind of reluctantly gets on the phone to Nelson Mandela, and Nelson Mandela tells him the plight of his company, and that all these people are going to lose their jobs, and this is a big gym chain, and I know you love a leisure business, would you consider taking it on? And they basically cut a deal while Richard's naked in the bath about him taking this business on, and he agrees to do it.
That's what you call naked ambition, I guess.
That's right. But in fact, years later, when we opened a gym in Soweto, which was Nelson Mandela's township he was from, the gym, when we opened it, we put that mural on the wall of the gym of Nelson Mandela on the phone to Richard with him being naked in the bath, just as a kind of epitaph to what had gone on. Anyway, so that's how Richard acquired this business and got into the fitness industry. But it was interesting because this really taught me a massive lesson. Because when I arrived to work there, which is a few years later, when I literally arrived in the building, they told me to go up to the 5th floor of this building in Claremont in Cape Town. And I remember waiting in the lobby, and the lobby was packed full of people, like it was just rammed. And I was thinking, oh geez, like it is going to stopping at every floor. It's going to take me ages to get up to my meeting, to start my work. And then the lift doors open. There was 2 lifts. The lift doors open, and I stepped in, and nobody got in behind me. And then I realized that this lift only goes to the 5th floor, whereas the other lift, which is like the service lift, went to every other floor. And I was kind of getting in and thinking, well, that doesn't feel very virgin. And then I kind of got to the office, and there was a bio scan to get in the office. And I remember people wouldn't really make eye contact, and it was just a weird vibe. And then I started to realize that what had happened was that when these gangsters had left this company, all the people that they had recruited, because people recruit people like themselves.
Sure.
This leadership had stayed in place, and these leaders had found it useful to run the company how it used to be run by the gangsters. So they kind of kept the status quo in place, even though Richard had, with his team, had been across, turned it into a Virgin company, changed the logo, changed the uniforms, changed the name on the door. But it hadn't really changed from its essence of what it was. It hadn't really changed. And obviously, when all those people flew back to London, it just had a habit of going back to how it was before. So Richard had been hearing some of the horror stories coming out of this company about culture and how the people were being treated. And I mean, give you an example of that, there was a line item in the club manager's P&Ls for lie detector testing their people.
You shouldn't go and work for MI5 at this point.
it felt very surreal. So it was quite normal for them to lie detect test their people if they didn't believe them. And this had this kind of behaviors had gone on. So Richard had done what he needed to do, which was to replace all of the leadership. And I was fortunate to be the chief operating officer going in. And so our mandate going in was to change the culture and to make this a Virgin company. So ironically, I thought I was going to go in to learn how to do Virgin, but actually had to learn how to be Virgin. How do I actually implement the brand? And that was really where I started from, just learning a whole nother set of skills of how do I convert something which was probably at the opposite end of what a virgin culture is, how do I make it, a virgin business, and take it on that journey, which is probably one of the most difficult things I think I've ever done.
Really? I mean, it sounds like a massive both opportunity and also risk, I guess, for you, that, going into this environment where I guess it was quite toxic and having to completely change all the structures around that. But I guess at the same time, I guess so much learning and an opportunity to really develop yourself and those around you. I mean, did you then build up your own team there, or did you manage to kind of convert the existing team to virgins, if that's possible? I don't know.
Yeah, it was interesting because you'd think with the Virgin brand, you get a lot of autonomy and a lot of leeway, to kind of, why is not everybody else as excited about this Virgin, brand as I am? So we did a lot of things. Like the first initiatives we put in place was things like, let's give them all their birthday off, let's give them free breakfast when they come in, let's do unlimited training, all those usual kind of culture stuff that you do. And nothing was making an impact. I mean, we were doing kind of culture surveys and team happiness surveys, and nothing was changing the dial. And there was a couple of reasons for it. One of those reasons was because the lead, people so recruit people like themselves. I had to start going quite deep to remove the leadership. And in fact, I removed 40% of that next tier of leadership. And I just, and I was quite dogged with it. Like, I was willing to go however far I had to go. If I was like the last person standing running this company, so be it. To kind of remove that kind of really deep rooted, terrible culture that was useful. And I always felt like I was, kind of, that whole journey that South Africa had been on with apartheid and trying to culturally change. I felt like I was on the same journey. So that was part of it. But another part was something that I kind of stumbled on, which was I was getting so frustrated by not being able to make the change that I decided to go and work a couple of shifts in the gym. And I guess that kind of goes back to my roots of, I didn't come out of a university graduate degree in how to run gyms. I worked the floor. So I went back to the floor and I thought, okay, I'm just going to figure out what's going on here. And while I was working the floor, I was with the club manager, and this Sam, who was a maintenance guy, he came up to us and he'd gashed his arm, and he'd missed with the screwdriver and cut his arm. And I was like, oh, Sam, you need to go to a hospital. That's, it's pretty bad. It probably needs a couple of stitches in it. So we sent him off to the hospital. And and then he was gone, and we got on with our shift. A couple of days later, this is the gym that was kind of underneath my office. And a couple of days later, I went back into the gym just to check up on him, see how he was. Got a hold of the club manager. She hadn't seen him. She hadn't seen him since it happened. And like this, there's up to 50 people working in one of these gyms. They're massive. So I was like, okay, well, let's go and find him. Anyway, long story short, we kind of, went off. And when you go into the townships, you don't have like road numbers and, house numbers. You just basically go in, you start to shout the name, and then eventually you kind of figure out somebody who knows where they live. And eventually, after a few hours, we kind of got to where he lived, and then his family hadn't seen him. So we kind of tracked it all the way back, and we tracked it back to the hospital. And when we went into the hospital to find him after, a bit of a wild goose chase, we eventually located him, and he'd gone into intensive care. And we just couldn't get our heads around this. Like, he'd gone in with like a cut arm, and it ended up in intensive care. But by this time, it had been like 72 hours. And anyway, what had happened was, he'd gone into the hospital, he'd been in the waiting room, he hadn't been seen. And then the wound had got infected and basically he got septicemia, like blood poisoning. He'd been rushed up to intensive care, having a cardiac episode. And the only way they could save him is to amputate his arm from the elbow down. So this yeah, so this all kind of unfolded, and we got to hear about what happened, and we're driving back to the club. I'm like, how can this, like, I can't even get my head around it. Like, how did we go from this to this? And so we pulled the team together, let them know what happened, and just kind of talked it through. And I said, guys, I don't understand, why does it take 3 days to get seen? And they said, well, that's simple. We don't have medical aid. And I was like, well, what do you mean medical aid? And they said, well, medical aid in South Africa is like a private medical insurance that most big companies just put in place. And it's not like, like we would know private medical insurance, like you get as an executive. This is just to give you basic medical care. And if you don't have it, you are literally at the back of the queue. And that's what happened. And, we weren't aware that this was a thing. We're a British company. We didn't understand that. And obviously the gangsters prior had never put it in. And the team, the people working the company just got on with it. They knew that was a risk, but we were losing 1 to 2 people a month from AIDS and TB at this point.
No.
It was rife. So you can imagine the fear that sat in the employees, where they're worried about getting a sniffle of a cold, or they're worried about not feeling good, that they immediately thought the worst. And obviously if they told people that they were sick and they couldn't get medical help and get the right meds they needed, then they wouldn't be able to earn money for their families. And often they say their townships were relying on them. So there was this whole kind of deep cultural issue around health and wellness and being sick and not having the medical cover to help them. So obviously off the back of that, I spoke to, the leadership, the executive and the board, and they put, they weren't aware. And as soon as it went, and it wasn't a small bill, it was like 7 million quid it cost us to put it in. But they immediately put in, medical aid. And I guess, the reason I'm telling you the story is that a massive learning for me was that once we put that in place and people felt safe and secure and felt that they could be taken care of and their families would be, the happiness level of the people just rocketed. So suddenly we got this massive uptick in happiness and engagement, and and the relationship just improved so substantially that we never looked back. And we just kind of, then all the other things, I relate it back to, do you remember Maslow's hierarchy from your old college days?
Ego, super ego.
Yeah, well, you remember the bottom rung about safety and security?
Yeah.
This was like playing out in real life for me, that people don't care about getting their birthday off, which is much higher up in those ego needs, or training or going on a league table, if they don't feel safe and secure. And that was a huge learning for me, that that I've carried forward into everything I've ever done since, which is start with your people feeling safe and secure. And you can't build happiness and culture until that's in place. So I'm grateful for that, because that taught me that lesson. But it was tough.
Wow. So I guess that kind of, cool credit in a minute, maybe that led into the book that has recently launched. So obviously you left Virgin. What was that like? Was that, did you feel, was it like with Fitness First, do you think the timing was right there, or was it kind of a leap of faith into the next venture?
I mean, I was there for 5 years, and it was definitely like a highlight of my career. I absolutely loved Virgin, and still do. I still love Virgin Active, especially South Africa. The people there are just amazing. I've never met people like it. The resilience, the fortitude that they have, but actually the unbridled happiness that they have as well is phenomenal. It'll always have a special place in my heart. But I feel that obviously I have to, I've got a family, and my daughter at that point, she got to that age where she wanted to ride a bike in the street, and she wanted to kind of and I wanted to get her into a country that she felt she could have a future in. And it was just really hard in South Africa. And my family gave me the 5 years to be there, and I felt it was probably time for me to think about giving something back to them. And I felt like my work here had been done. I felt like I had been given this mission to kind of move it from here to here. But I'm always more of a buccaneer than a field plower. I'm not good at kind of doing straight lines and just carrying on. So I felt like I was leaving it in a good spot. I had an amazing succession of team, and they just were able to take over. And yeah, I was actually approached by Mike Balfour, who was obviously I work for at Fitness First. He'd been contacting me a bit to say, come back and work for me, and let's do something else. And he bought a business in Poland actually that he wanted to expand into Southeast Asia. So he approached me and asked me to go and help him do that, which I agreed to for a couple of years, because I think it would be a great experience. But that was never going to be our kind of final place. But so yeah. Manager. Yeah.
Okay, so obviously Jets. Tell us about that story. I mean, obviously, again, what you've achieved there, for anybody has been phenomenal. I think for a woman in the fitness industry, probably even more so. So if you want to just run through that a little bit, and how that journey is, ending up being at the masthead as it is, and now obviously with taking over, I guess, looking at expansion elsewhere. If you could just tell us a bit more about that, and how that journey is, how all the learnings you've got from your previous roles, how that translated into your current role and that journey forward.
Yeah, well, I mean, in Jets, is part of my. I wanted to get to a country where I felt Jasmine could have, a good quality of life, and she'd spent the previous, whatever it was, 7 years in very different, compound living. So we came to Australia on a 90-day visa and had to make a plan. we had to make it happen in some way, and so I got it's always interesting how these things happen. And Brendan Levinson, who's the founder of Jets, had kind of reached out to me and contacted me on LinkedIn and said, I've seen what you've done at Virgin, because with the Virgin story, we went from pretty much hated by that, but by the employees, to we won the Deloitte Great Place to Work Awards just before I left.
You kind of missed that. You glossed over that. Well,
yeah, and when we won that award, it was so meaningful, because obviously we'd been so hated before. It took us 5 years. It wasn't an easy journey, but off the back of that, I'd done a few different presentations within the Virgin family of different, some of the other brands. And one of those presentations got videoed and put onto YouTube, and Brendan had seen it on YouTube and was kind of reaching out, asking, hey, I've seen the stuff that you've been doing at Virgin. I really want some help with culture. Just would love to be able to chat. And I was like, hey, well, interestingly, I'm in Australia now, and I'm just down the road in Brisbane, and let's have a chat. So that's how I connected with Brendan. And he'd been on his own journey, and Jets was the first 247 gym chain into Australia. And Brendan had started that business 5 years prior to me getting in it, and it just rocketed. He was opening a club every week. It was really, really busy, but he knew that he needed to get in the kind of systems and the processes, and to make sure the business was robust enough to cope with the growth. And I guess because I'd always, kind of come from a background of running big businesses in the fitness industry, he's a bit of a match made in heaven. Brendan's one of the most amazing people I've worked with. He is an incredible human, amazing value system, great guy to work with, true believer in customer and in culture. So we were a good partnership. So yeah, and also he knew that he'd want to sell the business, and part of my job was to help him kind of prepare it for that sale, which we did for a few years, and then we sold it to the Fitness and Lifestyle Group here. Brendan exited, and I took over the role as CEO when he left. So that was an interesting journey, being a part of a group when you're the only franchise business where your franchise network are on the same high street as a Fitness First, and a Good Life and a Zap, and you're owned by your competitors. So
yeah, that's strange. I mean, that must be quite like a weird relationship between like frenemies, I guess.
Frenemies is a good description of it. Yeah, I'll look. Greg Oliver, who's the CEO of that group. Him and I did our best. And I think we did a pretty good job of putting up Chinese walls and giving assurances to the franchise network that, you know, there's enough Chinese walls in place, that we weren't oversharing where we didn't need to overshare, you know, marketing plans or pricing strategies. And then we navigated that together, and, you know, it was tricky. There's no doubt about it. It was a tough time for Jets. And as I say, because, you know, franchising wasn't really that group's background, and we very much leaned into our kind of corporately owned growth. But equally, you know, we went into the pandemic being owned by them, and, you know, I wouldn't change it. You know, having that security of one of the largest private equity funds in Australia, whilst we navigated the franchise network with lots, you know, effectively small businesses through the pandemic, you know, was exactly what we needed, and gave a lot of comfort to people. So definitely wouldn't change it. Not sure I'd go through it again.
Bit like childbirth.
Yes, I only had one child, so I'm good at learning.
And then obviously you came out the back of that, the pandemic, and obviously you decided, you know, you were going to take control of Jets. And I guess, you know, what was the motivation there? Was it the fact that you felt that the relationship was too unusual, I guess, like you said, to have your competitors as the people running it, and, like, I guess the Chinese walls, as good as they can be, ultimately there's going to be, I guess, holes in the mortar, as it were.
Yeah, I think, you know, everybody assessed their strategies, didn't they, out the back of the pandemic? Nothing was left the same. So I knew that, you know, we had a lot of work to do with the franchising side of our business to kind of, you know, to shore up our individual, you know, business owners, and to make sure that they were going to be healthy and good for the future. And, you know, FLG was not in franchising, they were more into corporately owned. So it was an easy conversation for Greg and I to have, to say, look, you know, it's probably, you know, franchising is probably not part of your strategy. I actually think this is really where we need to double down, and, you know, perhaps it's an idea that I just, you know, acquire the company. So that was,
as you do.
That was, as you do.
Just got your wallet out, put the money down. Let's go.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, saying it out loud and actually somebody going, yeah, that sounds like a great idea, and you suddenly realize you've got to do it, it's two completely different things.
That's often what happens with entrepreneurs, though. I was listening to something, I think, about Bill Gates the other day, and he kept saying something, and then so many people had heard him say it that he was then, I've now got to do this. And I guess that probably applies to you. You know, you said you're going to do it, and then you just got to find a way of making it happen, hell or high water. So obviously you did. I mean, I guess another big journey and learning phase for you.
Yeah, massive. Yeah, I mean, I guess I've been around enough. You know, I'd done my years of being around entrepreneurs and understanding how businesses are bought and sold, and you know, equity and investments, and you know, and it was actually, it wasn't easy by far. As I say, that's probably the second most difficult thing I've ever done. Is, you know, trying to get a franchised fitness business investment out the back of a pandemic was near on impossible. You know, there were all things which were impacted, and obviously there was no numbers to quote because everybody had been so smashed through the pandemic.
What were your sales the last 2 years? Zero. Okay.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, literally no history to go at. Just take my word for it. It's going to be amazing.
Yeah.
So I did manage to get some private investors, and again, it was a bit of a journey I had to go on. You know, there was a private equity firm that was interested in the business, which we went quite far down the road with, and then I just pulled up the brakes. I had a 3 a.m. moment, like you do, going, I think I'm literally just going to create again what I'm coming away from, and this is not what I want. So I had to start again, and, you know, getting the right kind of investors on board, which we did. People that are passionate about what we do, complete believers, and, you know, we're going to give us the oxygen and the space to be able to do what we want to do. So that's what we did, and, you know, we're now actually today is our 2-year anniversary of concluding the year.
So that is serendipitous that I should talk to you on your anniversary. Congratulations! I forgot to get you a present though, but by all means, have a glass of champagne on me.
So yeah, and it's been an incredible 2 years, to be honest. You know, we've excelled in our numbers. We've done better than we thought. You know, we're back to international growth and franchising growth, and being able to really drive the essence of what our brand is, which is all about freedom. We don't do contracts. We have people, members with their kind of memberships on their terms and no small print. So we've really doubled down on our brand values, and that's been amazing to do and to kind of go back to those roots of ours. So yeah, that kind of brings
amongst all of this, you've then also managed to find time to write a book, High Performance Through Happy People. Just tell me a bit about that, and and is this the first of a series, or is this a one and done?
Well, I'll tell you, I've got one daughter, yeah, so I'm good at learning from my pain. Yeah, so back in 2017, I got to guest write a chapter in a leadership book for the Australian Institute of Management.
Yeah,
and that was something which I never really thought I'd do, but I did, and it was actually the publishing house that published that book who approached me and said, like, we think you've got a book in you, we think you should write a book. So that was 2017, 2018, 2019, and every year, they would come to me and say, how are you getting on with that book? And I kind of wrote the first half of it, and then, with pandemics and management buyouts, etc., I got a bit busy and didn't finish it. And then Leslie, who owns that publishing house, she did a classic move on me. She said 98% of people who write a book never finish it. And if I'm anything, I'm a finisher.
Yeah, so that was it. It was the fire that was lit, and off you went.
Yeah, so I literally wrote the second half of the book in 3 weeks over Christmas, 8 hours a day, every day. And wow. I managed to get the book finished. So she gave me a drop dead deadline, and I'm very good to a deadline as well. But don't leave me hanging out in the wind with no deadline.
Yeah.
And I got it done. So, and I say I'm glad I did, because I've always wanted to kind of capture, that is people and culture is really important to me, and I wanted to capture the essence of how I did what I did, particularly with Virgin. But I have so many people kind of want to access tools, and I'm always kind of rehashing the tools and emailing them out. Now I can just point them to the book and say, well, here you go, it's all there. So
yours a bargain price of, yeah.
That's it. Go and take the books. I'm always giving copies away, much to the detriment of my of my sales. That's right. But no, I just like people to have the information. I'm a prolific reader and absorber of information, so it's nice to have it out there.
So this book, do you think it's aimed? Is there an audience that you've got in mind for it, or is it really for everybody just interested in entrepreneurship and the journey that one can go on?
It's specifically, and it's actually quite a how-to book. So it's specifically for people that want to build a great culture in their company. But it could be for somebody that just has, they're leading a department or they're leading an area of the business. It's as much for them as it is for the CEO.
Yeah.
And it's a really step-by-step guide as to if you want to have a world-class culture that produces performance but has that driven by people being really happy in their roles, then this is how to do it. And it's really trying to explain that old-fashioned way of kind of driving performance through long hours, through league tables, through all of that carrot and stick stuff of days gone by is irrelevant. If you want sustainable long-term performance, then you have to do it through happiness. It's the only way that you'll get those results over the long run. And because I've kind of experienced that myself, I just wanted to really give a step-by-step guide as to how to do that.
Brilliant. So I've taken up a lot of your time, so really appreciate that. Be great to kind of get some final thoughts for you on people, top tips on how to, make it happen, whether it be in commerce as you've done, or just generally in life. What are your kind of 3 or 4 kind of big things that you think that we all need to focus on, and how we can kind of go about them?
Yeah. First and foremost, I think you have to invest in your leadership. If you want to get ahead, and it doesn't matter whether you're leading a big organization or for a small team, you have to hone your skills as a leader. And that's doing stuff. It's completing courses, it's reading books, it's taking all your knowledge and applying it in a live environment, getting the feedback, improving again. And so that's the journey I went on, and I'm so grateful for the leaders that kind of put me through the ranks of learning how to be a leader. Some people are born leaders. There's the Barack Obamas and the Nelson Mandelas of the world, but the rest of us have to learn that hard skill of leadership. And I think you can't build anything on a foundation that's not solid. And if you're going to do anything great, you've got to build it on great leadership. So that would be my first one for sure. I think once you've got leadership in place, it's about kind of mapping out how are you going to create a business that stands for something. If you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. And really defining, and that's why I always love capturing a founder's story. Because the founder of a business, it's like it's like bearing a child. The child has a personality and it's got values and it's got and I think being able to really specify in detail what it is you're setting out to do, what's when we talk about vision, mission and values, you got to take that stuff really seriously, and you've got to make it so tangible and so real. That's what Virgin do very well. It doesn't matter what business you go to. You could go to the airline or the wines business or the gym business. There's a book called Do It Yourself, and it's a little red book that Richard created. And Do It Yourself is all about here's the rules of the game, here's the guardrails that you've got to operate within, but within that, do what the hell you like. And that empowerment of how to operate within those values is the magic source as to how he gets all of his businesses to run the same. Wow. And I think people pay lip service to that process, but I don't think they go as deep as they should and not move from it until they have that. And then I think, the last thing for me would be, really about, not focusing on profit. I talk a bit about profit in the book, about this concept of good profit and bad profit. And we're not very good at identifying profit being good or bad. We just think profit's profit. But the pursuit of profit alone never ends well. It makes you make decisions which are not always in the interest of the customer or the people that work in the organization. And we try and satisfy the happiness of our shareholders or investors. Whereas actually, if you invest the happiness of your people, that becomes infectious to your customer. And if your customers are happy, they're buying more, they're telling more people about it, which makes your shareholders happy. So shareholders and investors should be thought about last, not first.
Oh yeah,
so
customer first, always, 100%.
Yeah.
And I think, from my experience, what happens is, I think if you're just pursuing sales and profits alone, it's not rewarding. And particularly if you hit upon a hard time, like you said with the pandemic, that's when I guess a lot of people would give up. Whereas if you're doing it from a point of passion and being excellent, then you're going to try and get through those tough times and achieve it on the other side. So that's a really good finishing thought, I guess. For sure. So look, thank you so much for your time, and it's been an absolute pleasure, and hopefully there is another book in you and we'll hear more about it in the future.
That's awesome. No, it's a pleasure. It's been a really good chat. So I'll give some thoughts whether there'll be another one coming out.